And Jesus told them another parable. The reign of God is like a farmer who goes out and sows seed in the field. As the crop begins to grow, his family notices that there's also weeds growing in the field, and this disturbs them. In fact, the helpers come and demand that he do something. Pull the weeds out, they say. But the farmer says the danger is that if you begin to pull the weeds out of the field, you might also be pulling up the good crops. I remember growing up in the Midwest in the middle of summer, finding out in the front yard hundreds of dandelions. Of course, it was my way to get some money because every time that I went out to dig dandelions, I expected to get a quarter for digging up the individual dandelions. And wasn't it true? You all know who grew up in the Midwest and up north. If you didn't dig up the dandelions right away, that they would produce those tiny little flurry seeds. And oh my God, within weeks you'd have hundreds more dandelions in your field. Of course, it's kind of surprising now, and it always disturbs me when you go to a restaurant and they have one of these fancy-dancy salads, and I look down into the salad and oh my God, there's dandelion greens in this salad. They were weeds. So something about this parable is meant to alert us to the reign of God. Not that there are weeds in the midst of the reign of God, but something else is going on here. Remember, as we're listening to these parables, they really should not be taken literally, although they do come from literal experiences, right? Jesus is in northern Galilee in the midst of one of the richest agricultural regions of the Middle East. And so when he uses these images of farmers sowing seeds, his audience would have immediately understood them. And they would perhaps even understood what it's like to wake up and see weeds growing next to your crops. Remember, every weed in the field reduces the amount of yield from the field itself. So these parables are from real life, but in a metaphorical and figurative way. Remember, they are to be telling us about the reign of God. Something's going on here that Jesus is trying to alert us to in terms of the way that God is working in our midst. So let me reflect a moment on the first reading from the book of Genesis today. It's one of the great stories out of the Old Testament. Jacob's on his way to Haran to marry a wife, and on the way he decides to take a siesta, and as he lays down on the ground to take his siesta, he has this dream. And in the dream, he sees a ladder going from earth to heaven, and he sees angels ascending and descending on this ladder. And in the midst of this vision, in the midst of this dream, he hears the voice of God saying, not to worry, Jacob, not to worry. Your descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars of heaven, just like it was said to his grandfather, Abraham. And so as Jacob reflects upon this dream, he wakes up from it, shocked and surprised, perhaps looks around and wondered, what's going on? And he declares, wow, this is an awesome place. This is surely the gateway to heaven. In fact, he renames the place Bethel, meaning the house of God, the place where God dwells. Something about this, again, is not to be taken literally, and in fact, the biblical writer alerts us to this by saying it happens in a dream. And how many times in our dreams, in our subconsciousness, things are happening in the dreams, and if we can remember them the next day, all of a sudden we go, wow, that's telling me something about my life in the real world. It's not real, but it's telling me something about my life in the real world. Jacob's declaration that this is surely the gateway to heaven is what the parables are about, gateways to heaven. Something about these parables, these images, these stories that Jesus is telling us is meant to have us enter into the realm of God. What's going on in the realm of God? I think about it in the world today that as the farmer is watching his field be covered by weeds, I can't help but think, as the servants suggest, pull them up. That the impatience that the servants have to get rid of the weeds is often our impatience. At least it's my impatience, especially now when I'm concerned about being in crowds and I go to the grocery store and there are 2 or 3 people in line waiting ahead of me, and I'm just kind of in a panic. My God, I want to get this over with. I want to get out of here as fast as possible. I know I'm not a good commuter, and so sometimes the 30-mile drive that I have from my house to the church office, especially when there was a lot of traffic, I'm just really impatient. My hands are gripped around the wheel tight, and I'm just so impatient. And that's kind of where we are right now, right, with this virus. Just get it over with. The impatience that we have in life with our spouses, with our children, with our co-workers, wherever it may be, with God perhaps even. Impatient. God, do something now, is about how we really experience life, right? So what about this parable and even this story from the book of Genesis about Jacob? He could have rushed to Haran. He was so anxious to get a wife and start a family that he does this in stages. And this moment in time is a stage that God invites him into a dream and a vision of what the realm of the divine is about. And something about this parable, too, is reminding us that maybe in our desire to rush, to come to conclusions, to find answers, to solve reality and the troubles and the struggles that we face, maybe this parable is a way that God is inviting us into, here's the word, patience. Over the years, when people have confessed that they are impatient and they see this as a sin of being impatient, I say, never pray for patience. I think we get more tests and more things come our way to make us even more impatient. At least that's how we judge it and how we think about it. Behind me is a artist's rendering of the great story of St. Francis of Assisi, and he's one of my favorite saints. I think he's a very ecumenical saint on top of it. And the prayer of St. Francis says, in the midst of all of these things that we face, our response to it is often negative. But what we're invited to consider is to enter into the way of God's shalom, God's peace. I think that's a part of this parable today, and the example of St. Francis can help us with this. When we're faced with trials and struggles and tribulations, right now in particular, the last thing that we want to hear is be patient, be peaceful. I know, I don't like hearing that because it makes me more anxious and more frustrated and more desirous of getting it done right now. But that's in the realm of God. You see, everything that I've described about our impatience and our anxiety to resolve this virus and to get back to normal life is our world. That's the world that we live in. But the parable invites us into the realm of God. And a part of what the farmer is suggesting is, let them grow. Let the weeds and the wheat grow. Wow, how can you possibly say that, farmer, when you know that every weed replaces a stalk of wheat? And that means less for you and for your family. But the farmer says, no, let them grow. As if God is saying, let it grow, let it happen. That's a part of the now reality. Let this be. Be in peace. Be in shalom. The biblical idea of shalom is not just peace in terms of the absence of conflict or anxiety or fear or whatever. The biblical concept of shalom is the harmony and balance that we have to have in this world, in our lives, because that's reflective of the reign of God. God's reign is not about anxiety and anger and frustration. God's realm is about wholeness, restoring brokenness, making whole, binding up wounds, setting us free from our fears and anxieties so that we can enter shalom. Be patient, the farmer says, because you never know what might happen. there's where we have to stop with the parable. You never know what might come from the choice we make to live in shalom, to be in balance and harmony. I think that's a part of what St. Francis said. Try it. Try being an instrument of peace and the shalom of God instead of an instrument of anxiety and frustration. Try being an instrument of peace, where you can live in the harmony, where you can live in the balance of God's realm. I don't know if that helps right now, but it might be a good word to consider for the parable today. Have a great day. Many blessings to you. Make sure that you watch for our Zoom church service on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday. Call the office on Tuesday so that Beth can help you if you missed the email that's come out. Blessings and prayers to all of you who are struggling with health today, who are just struggling to make ends meet, perhaps. Just ends meet, meaning how are we going to continue dealing with this? Find the shalom and the balance and the peace of God in your life today, because that's what the parable invites us to consider about the reign of God in our midst.